Well, welcome everyone. We're very excited to have you here for our Business in Focus webinar. Today we just changed it. What's it called, John? Seven what?
Seven steps to a disaster resilient business.
Yeah, it was 10, but 10 is the new, seven is the new 10. So now we're at seven to help you with disaster preparedness. So we're very excited to have John Wary with us today. As you can tell, we've all known John forever. I'm like going to say how old I am because I used to know John's parents when they had the most amazing gift store on Kester. So I talk about that store all the time, John. It's the best gift store ever. But John has spent the past 2 decades building coalitions and communities, creating messages that lead to direct actions and creating plans to achieve targeted results, primarily related to natural hazard resilience. Having worked for elected officials to co-create the Great Shakeout to guiding community engagement related to sweeping seismic policy changes, John's diverse experience has enabled him to focus these efforts on connecting and empowering communities. He serves as CEO of Stratoscope, which is a community engagement company that harnesses the power of community to help organizations refine and achieve their core purpose. He's also, and I think this is always the coolest thing, is people will sit there and say they have their favorite seismologist. He's currently the deputy director to Dr. Lucy Jones Center for Science and Society. So if you're from California, you don't know who Dr. Lucy Jones is, shame on you, or you've never been through an earthquake. Their mission is to apply science to build more resilient communities in the face of natural hazards. Now, in John's side hustle, because he's not busy enough, right? He also serves as the CEO of 2 Southern California chambers, which is the Alhambra and the Temple City Chamber. He's also the executive director of the Structural Engineers Association of Southern California. He's also worked on resilience projects for the USGS Natural Hazards Program, the Natural Hazards Center at Colorado University Boulder, and the American Geophysical Union, as well as developing and leading SoCal disaster risk reduction initiatives. So you can tell that he is well versed in this topic. We actually had him speak at a conference for chambers all over the country, and to rave reviews. And then Fumi sent me a text while John was talking and saying, why don't we have John do this for us? And voila, we're here today. So John, take it away.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm really honored to be with you and share some information. And yes, officially, this is the 7 steps to disaster resilience, but for businesses. But we're gonna go probably deeper than 7, and I'm looking forward to a more specific conversation after the presentation. So by the time that we're done together today, you're gonna have the actual next steps you can take as a business or as a business leader to make your business more resilient, to encourage your fellow businesses and your business community to be more resilient. So I'm going to take a moment and share my screen, get into the presentation, and then when we're complete, I'll come back and we'll do some questions. So with that, here we go. So what does it mean to be resilient? I mean, that's sort of the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves. And basically what we're talking about is the ability to withstand the shocks and the stresses to the system that you're in, whether it's the economic system, the social system, the environmental system. And for us here in Southern California, in the San Fernando Valley, we have a number of risks. So the first step in this, I did this so that if we shared the presentation, we could you'd have all the writing, is to identify your potential hazards, right? So we are focused on earthquakes definitely here in the San Fernando Valley and Los Angeles, but there are more than a dozen different disasters that could impact your business or your organization. And that doesn't have to be just a natural hazard. It could be, a power plant has a switch that flips and powers out for 2 days, or there's a windstorm and something's knocked over, or your building, someone drives off the road in the night and crashes into your building and you can't access your building. So a disaster or a hazard can be any number of things. And so the first thing you have to do is use science to be able to then understand what your hazard is going to be. So here on the screen, you can see everything from earthquake to fire to flood. We don't have hurricane technically, but then again, last year we did have a hurricane force event potentially coming to Southern California. So we include hurricane now, but like you see here, power outage, those of you near Van Nuys and Burbank airports and Whiteman, there is the potential for a plane crash, right? Terrorism. It could be a tsunami if you're coastal. I know that volcanic eruption you're like, we're in Southern California. We don't have volcanoes. But if you remember, what is it, about 12 years ago or more, there was the Icelandic volcano that erupted and canceled all flights in sort of over the the Atlantic, and it sort of interrupted business. So you have to think about all these different things that could potentially impact your business. And depending upon where you are, you may have other issues or risks, right? If you're in a hillside and maybe your business is in, the flats, but maybe your senior leadership or your employees are living in hillsides that are impacted by wildfire, that might be something you have to look at. Or maybe even more so, if your employee base and your leadership is living in Thousand Oaks, but your business is in Van Nuys and there's a wildfire in, Calabasas, you may not be able to get in to your business. Your business might be fine, but that's an interruption that you have to plan for. And being Southern California, it's a little more unique than other parts of the country where they still have the risk. Don't get me wrong, tornadoes, hurricanes, even earthquakes, other places. But when when your community is smaller, it sort of, you're all affected by the same thing. In Los Angeles, and especially the San Fernando Valley, we know that, like I said, you could be living in Simi Valley, you could be living in the Conejo Valley, you could be living in this, the LA Basin. You're actually physically fine, your home is fine, but there's some interruption that prevents you from accessing or serving your business. And that's what we're thinking about when we think about really thinking about what those hazards might be. And so you'll see here this risk assessment matrix. All of this is based on a guidebook that I was a part of called 7 Steps for Resilient Businesses. And at the end, we'll give you the link where you can download a copy. It actually looks like this. So it's actually a booklet and has like all sorts of charts and fillable things and extra tips that you can go through as a way to support your business. But step 1 is to know what your risks are. Really do a deep dive. Assemble your senior management, your partners, maybe other businesses that are proximate to you, to sort of think through what this might be. The second step is to create a plan. Now, this is the part where I'll pause for a second and say, if you think about entrepreneurship and business, and all of you are in business, business plans went from the 40-page business plan you developed in your MBA program to the 2-page business plan, right? And so disaster plans similarly could be 150 pages. We've seen them that much for an individual business, even a small business, or it could be 2 pages, right? But the idea here is that your plan says, I'm thinking about what's coming and I'm going to make some key decisions now so I don't have to make decisions later. And so some of the basic things that need to be included are like employee emergency contacts. This means that if you have a disaster in your business, you can, and yes, I have a question in the chat. Yes, we will provide a copy of the slides to you. Absolutely.
Okay.
With a link to the original information as well. But emergency contacts, right? Knowing how to get a hold of your employees at home or on their cell phone. Maybe you have it, maybe you don't, and maybe their emergency contact. Because what if something happens at work and you have to contact someone for your employee, right? So usually through your HR onboarding, you'll have that emergency contact fill out. But where is it stored? Is there a hard copy printed out somewhere? Is there a digital copy? If it's only in hard copy, do you have it 2 different places so that you can contact people? And who else do you need to contact? Well, what about customers, special vendors, other people that you do business with? Again, depending upon your business, you may have a different need for contacts. But the basics here is, where's a place where if I had to pick up one folder and run out the door because the building's on fire, or my building burnt down and I have no access to anything that was there, where is it stored on a cloud? Do you have that Google Doc? Do you have that Teams document that's in the cloud somewhere that has this information? So we used to say, like, do you have a flash drive? You may think about duplicating these efforts so that your disaster plan lives in multiple places, but the idea is those redundancies make it easily accessible and that more than just you have access to it. I always have people outside the area have access to my information. I happen to have a remote employee, and that employee has access to this information. So if something happens in Southern California, that person that's out of state is not going to have, they can be our point of contact for everybody. Then you go through your disaster plan, you think about key critical business functions, like what is it you actually do and need to make sure to keep your company running? Do you need electricity to run? Maybe not, maybe you do. What are the vital records? Do you know where your articles of incorporation are? Are they digitized? Do you know where your insurance documents are? Do you have your insurance agent's contact information available? Those are those critical and vital records that you want to have digitized or at least referenced. We have all of ours digitized securely so that we know all of our, DUNS numbers and everything's in one place so that if something were to happen, we could access that information so that when we go to apply for loans or grants or emergency relief, we have what we need. And what we learned from the pandemic is that you need 2 years of taxes, not just in a drawer in your office, but perhaps even digitized, right? To verify who you are and what you've done when you go to apply for those grants. So what this disaster plan actually helps you do also is be ready to receive that relief, because those that are prepared and ready to receive that relief because you're planning for it will be able to get it faster. And that's the difference between a business opening and closing in the long term. After a disaster, within a year, like 50% of businesses that don't have a plan after a disaster close if they don't reopen. If they don't reopen, they close. I'm sorry, if they reopen, but not within the first, I think, 14 days, they're more likely to, 50% are more likely to close. So it's having this plan actually prepares you to reopen either in that location or wherever you might be, or do business. So it may not be reopening. And that's, again, we all had a practice run of the next disaster when we went through the pandemic, of knowing what it actually takes to pivot and be up and running after there's an impact to the system. When we think about your business, I don't know what everyone's businesses are here, but if you're, a manufacturer, or you've got a retail store, or you're an office, those are all very different operations. If you're strictly office, professional services, you probably could, everybody go work from home, no problem. Like we've had practice, we know how to do it. As long as there's power and internet, you're set. But if you're a retail business, unless you have a solid online, remote fulfillment function, you may have a difficulty if you're not able to physically reopen. If you're a restaurant, especially. But if you're a manufacturer, can you get back in? Is your equipment usable? Do you have backup power? So this critical equipment and machinery is required to help you keep up and running. Your locations, do you have a satellite location? If something happens in the valley, do you have a business partner, maybe someone you do business with, or maybe a industry partner that is located in the South Bay or located in the Inland Empire, so that you could keep functioning, again, depending upon what your business is. Think about your emergency life-saving response. Do you have fire extinguishers? Is part of your plan having fire extinguishers? Do your employees know how to do it? Have you trained your employees on CERT? All those things are part of the plan. And then do you have a regular interval by which you update this plan? I say at least once a month, once a year. Sorry, not once a month. That's a little overkill, but once a year minimum. Probably appropriately once every 6 months, just because there's so much that changes, and especially if you have turnover in staff. Because you want to socialize this document and make sure everybody understands. Now, because of the work we do, my team talks on a very regular basis about, if we can't communicate, where do we meet? If there's an impact in one location, is there another location? Do we actually have a response function? We all meet at a certain location and work to do things, right? But every time there's a new employee, we have to review that with everyone and so make sure everybody's on the same page. That may not be for every business, but at least once a year, dust it off, go through it, really read through it with a couple other folks, ask the questions, thinking about what you've seen happen in the news or happened locally, and be able to refresh that. Number 3. So disaster supply kits. This is a really, it depends the disaster you're preparing for of what you should do. So you can see here all the things you might need, and, you have to decide what's good for you. Sometimes we look at a disaster kit and say, well, do we already have a first aid kit because we're a business on side? Great. Do we already have, maybe we're, if you're a restaurant, you don't need to store any food. You got it all right there, right? Maybe storing water. Are you going to expect your people to stay working or come into work? Then you need to have supplies. But if you're going to send everybody home, you may not need as much, but just make sure that they're prepared at home. Maybe the next time you do holiday gifts for your employees, instead of doing a $50 bonus, $100 bonus, you buy everybody a home disaster kit so that they are prepared at home and more likely to come back to work because they feel like they've got what they need at home. So you think about what you need based on your industry, based on the risks you're facing that you might want to store at your office. We have water delivery at our office. So the way that we store water is that we actually have more of the big 5-gallon jugs that we actually need. So when we replace the 3 every couple of weeks that get replaced, we still have 2 that are full. So we have that extra water here. It's just as part of the rotation. So even if it's the day of our pickup and we have the empty ones out, we still have water. And that's a great way. And we rotate them through. So we're not just holding on to the same 2. Those 2 get into the rotation as we go through our jug. But if you don't have that, other ways to store water are available. If it's in plastic, just a quick note, you don't want it to sit around too long because the plastic leaches. So about 6 months. So especially like water, like, oh, we have water bottles. We bought them 5 years ago. You got to replace and check on those supplies. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. The one thing I'll say in your disaster kit should also be information that you can use in the disaster. So do you need to have cheat sheets for neighbors that weren't prepared? Do you need to give people, is there pre-printed cards with communications to customers where you're like, hey, we're not going to have power. We need to have a postcard already made up or a poster already made up that says, closed for information, text, and a number. It's already done. So you don't have to think about it, or at least you have it as one of your checklist items. So think about what you might need to communicate to others that you could store in a kit that's non-perishable that would help you. After you get your kit, next you want to identify your physical weaknesses. This is really an earthquake issue, but also for fire as well. An older building. I'm in a building currently in North Hollywood that is from 1956. It was originally built as a arrow manufacturer for studios, a bow and arrow. They used to make arrows here in this office. It's gone through some iterations, but it's an older building, right? It's not modern. It's one story. When I bought it, I had an engineer look at it. It's a slab foundation, so there's no like basement or crawl space or cripple wall that we have to address. But I know that my weaknesses are I have a flat roof, so I have to worry about rain. And whenever there's, sort of at the end of summer, I always sort of have my guy go up and take a look at the roof because I don't want to have a giant leak overnight like we've seen, last 2 years ago in Alhambra. There was a Target that had some rags they were doing work on the roof. The employees supposedly had left some materials and had blocked a drain. The roof filled up with water. The business was closed for 8 weeks because it had flooded out the roof and all the merchandise. They had to restock and redo the entire store. Like that could have been your office building. That could have been your restaurant. So when you think about weaknesses, think about not just the earthquake and the structural, which I want you to think about. If you're in an older building, multi-story building, really have an engineer check it out. But also think about the other risks you might face. I'm next to 2 other buildings, so I think about fire. I think about evacuation routes. I think about replacing the door in the back with a push bar instead of a handle because it helps for easier egress. So those are things you want to think about: your physical space, the building that you spend time in. How do you keep your employees and your customers safe? And perhaps even your investment of inventory and or machinery, computers, et cetera. This is really important. And I think I'll just pause here also. We're talking about natural disasters, but it's also like the local disasters. We're in a very volatile time. We have a lot of folks that are experiencing financial hardship and are unhoused. And in our neighborhood here, we've had some folks get broken into. So we put in a stronger gate in the back so no one could get into our building. That's not a disaster preparation, but it's thinking about the risks that my business might face. And I think that that's a really important concept here, that don't look at this as the extreme event only, but just the little events that might happen just to you that are your own personal disaster. If someone breaks in and steals your computers, that's a big personal disaster. Nobody else is affected but you. And so what can you do when you think about your building's weaknesses? Security is part of that. Think about that. And then so during the event. So I'm going to just make sure you think about earthquakes first, because that's the one that is the event that we don't have really any preparation or a warning for. And that's why the example here is about drop, cover, hold on. That's what you do in an earthquake. But you think about other events. We're all required, I hate to bring it up, but the workplace violence prevention plans that are all due this year based on the California law. We have to think about what we can do to protect ourselves and our employees and our business during an actual event. So if you have a leak, are you getting tarps? If you know you're in a wildfire zone, how do you have evacuation? How do you wait so it's not the last minute and people are trapped in traffic? Like, thinking about protecting yourself and your employees during an event is really important. Again, before you get to the event, this is part of your planning, but it's also being aware that there's things that you can do. So, for earthquakes, right? You drop, cover, hold on. Don't tell people to run outside. make sure that there are sturdy desks or something they can get underneath. In fact, when we got into this office, I got I'm knocking on my desk. We got new desks that were sturdier because I knew that we wanted to make sure that our employees could, if there was an earthquake at work, get under something and be safe versus a glass table that's really cool, but doesn't protect you from falling debris. So you want to protect yourself. And so obviously in the office, but think about what you store around, is your egress in the back, the emergency exit blocked by boxes, not maybe directly, but like you have to shimmy by in order to get to your emergency exit. That's not for an earthquake, just for emergency exit, right? Think about those things. Do doors lock that need to lock to keep yourself safe from the outside world or from somebody that may be causing some issues in your place? Protect yourself and employees during the event. Then after an event, what's your assessment? Thinking about what are the things that are external to you that might impact you after an event? So do you have water? Do you smell gas like for an earthquake? Is after a rainstorm, do you have mold? Like, is it damp? Do you need to fan it out? Like, think about those issues on the physical space. And obviously after an event, you want to check on people and not just their physical safety. It's unlikely that, earthquake statistics, the big earthquake that we project on the San Andreas Fault that goes from the Salton Sea up through Palmdale, 7.8 earthquake, not the biggest we could have. The shakeout earthquake, it's affects strong shaking for 18 million people. And unfortunately, about 1,500 people might lose their life out of 18 million people. It's mostly the 250,000 people who get injured that need hospital stays. Still, out of 18 million, not very high percentage. You're not going to really have a lot of death or injury likely. It's really about the economy and the space that you're in. So you're really thinking about how you respond to an event in this space that you're in. And think about, I think this last thing is, after the event, what is your, like, okay, we're all going to meet in the parking lot if we have to evacuate, but what if you don't evacuate? What if you have to shelter in place? Where are you meeting? What are you doing? How are you communicating with family members of the employees? If your employees are not feeling like their families are safe or taken care of, they're not staying at work. They're getting in their cars and leaving. They're ditching their cars and riding a bike or walking on foot. Like, it's a reality that you have to deal with this, the psychological response to an event. And again, that event might be the car accident next in the building next door. It may not even directly affect you, but psychologically affect your employees in your workplace and the perception of your customers. One of the big things we have to think about as a community is how we project the response we have to the outside world. If they hear that earthquake destroys the San Fernando Valley, but really it was really bad in like Northridge, Sherman Oaks, Chatsworth, and Granada Hills, but a lot of places were okay 2 days later, but the message was Valley destroyed. I'm thinking back 1994. That impacts people's perception of, oh, I'm not going to live there. I'm not going to visit there. I'm not going to spend money there. I'm not going to do business there. That impacts the economy. So our job as business leaders, as business owners, is to make sure that we are very swift in our response and our communication about what are actions that we're taking. And that means working together with others. So making sure that after the event, you have a plan to social media. Hey, we were impacted, but we're back. Even looking at what happened in Lahaina, right, in Maui last August, right? We're not even a year away, but the news immediately was, Hawaii, Maui fire destroys Hawaii, right? Like, I mean, it was destroys Maui. Like, I canceled a trip that I was going on because they said, don't come, but we canceled it before. Then they said, oh no, we need you to come to spend money. Like, that messaging, really important, but it also requires businesses to be ready to be able to receive people. That may be more of an extreme event because their industry is tourism. But in the San Fernando Valley and the greater Los Angeles area, business to get going, it's also a perception idea, and communication on social media and other platforms is a key way to remind customers and others that you are open for business. That requires you after the event to be able to get back to business. And then finally, as part of being resilient, is that after that event, you do your plan. Like, how do you get back up and running? So you've done that work in the beginning so that you can do the response and recovery at the end, and it all starts over again, right? It continues to go around and around and around. So those are your 7 steps that that sort of are the foundation of how a business can be resilient. But I think the key takeaways are this. It's unique to each business, industry, profession, etc. So I'm not sure who on the call, like what everybody's businesses are on the call, but if you're a professional service, a restaurant, retail, online sales, manufacturing, hospitality, all of those are different. So you're going to have a different plan just based on business, and each business based on the area it exists in and the customers it serves and how it serves them is going to have a different response too. So while I'd love to get up here and say, here's the 7 things every person must do and give you very specific things, what I've given you is the framework by which you can undertake things that relate to you, because that is what has to happen. That is why a lot of businesses and even individuals are not resilient, because it's not easy. Like, let's be honest. It's not easy, but it also doesn't have to be complicated. It just requires incremental work, one step at a time, just the pieces that make sense for you that you're comfortable with. You may even think about dividing up the tasks among 5 people, and each takes their piece, and then you're able to come back together and say, here's what I did, here's what I did, and build a plan that way. But ultimately, the bottom line is, even today, there is one thing you can do today when you get off this call, or even while you're listening to our Q&A component now, that allows you to be that much more resilient because you're able to do something. And that's the message. Before you go to sleep tonight, do one thing that makes your business more resilient based on what I've talked about here, even if it's just spending 15 minutes understanding what kind of zone you're in terms of earthquakes, where your nearest fault is, what your floodplain looks like. That's super interesting information to get you started. And go to government websites, not someone that claims to be an earthquake predictor, in order to get that information. But that gets you a little more information on the right step. That's the one thing that you can do today. The second thing that you have to do next week, or even today, but by next week, is talk to someone else, whether they're in your organization, or maybe even more importantly, someone outside your organization that's also in business, that you may be proximate to you, either in your industry or physical location. Say, hey, I went to this webinar, I watched this webinar, and I think we need to talk about what we would do if power went out for 4 days, or what we would do if our street was blocked for, a day and a half, or if there was a big earthquake, and start to have that conversation. And it could be, I don't know what to do, but I wanted to let you know we probably should do something. Do you have any ideas? And just start talking about it with someone to create that relationship, because that's actually more important than anything in a plan, is knowing enough people around you that can be your support system. And being part of a chamber of commerce is like one of the most important things you can do as being to be resilient, because you have this network of people that are connected to other people, and it's a really important opportunity for you to build your own resilience by being connected to people. So with that, I can answer a lot of questions, specifics or general. I'll turn it back to Fiumi and Nancy to moderate, or however you'd like to handle that. And you're on mute right now, Nancy.
You're muted, Nancy.
I'm just going to chime in really quick on some of the things John said at the beginning too. So back in the day, there was this state law that you had to have a safety plan, and you had to pay someone to do it back then. You didn't have ChatGPT to help you write it and look it up for you. And we had paid someone to write this plan, and we actually really implemented the plan. So when the Northridge earthquake happened, we were prepared. We had we had an out-of-state person, like you were saying, like that everyone could check in with. We had tons of water. We knew what we were going to do. And so, happened at 4:20 in the morning. And a bunch of people couldn't get to the office because a bunch of the buildings around us were banks and the glass broke. And so the Federal Reserve does not let you into the bank. So we couldn't even get into our neighborhood when we were in Victory. And so one person, though, she was actually in Vegas, and she drove back, and she's the one who went to the office because she was able to get there by the time they cleared, everything out. But we were completely prepared for all of that. Now I have to say, just what John said, your staff changes, and then you don't go back and reiterate that to everyone. And so since then, it has been how many years since the Northridge earthquake?
30.
And how many staff changes have we had? And while I know where all of our account numbers are, and I was able to access all of that during the pandemic so we could get loans, FEMA doesn't know anything about our plan. We've worked together for a million years, right? And so it's so important to keep that updated. And where do you have copies of things? And like, if you have your own business, what's your transition plan? Anyhow, a lot of that information is in your transition plan. I just want to say, that stuff's really helpful. We probably need to do that again. I mean, the one thing we do have is a ton of water and tuna fish cans, only because I keep bringing them for lunch and then I never eat them. So, does anyone have any questions?